We're reading today from Colossians chapter 4, verses 7 to 11. All my state shall Tychicus declare unto you, who is a beloved brother and a faithful minister and fellow servant in the Lord, whom I have sent unto you for the same purpose, that he might know your estate and comfort your hearts, with Onesimus, a faithful and beloved brother, who is one of you. They shall make known unto you all things which are done here. Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, saluteth you, and Marcus, sister's son to Barnabas, touching whom ye receive commandments, if he come unto you, receive him. And Jesus, which is called Justus, who are of the circumcision. These only are my fellow workers unto the kingdom of God, which have been a comfort unto me. I'm sure at times you've come across people who love to talk about themselves. Incessant chatter about what they have, where they went, what they did, who they are. And whenever you try to talk about something or someone else, it always comes back to them. One of the things that strikes me about the Apostle Paul is that he wasn't like that at all. In fact, he tells us in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 that he would sooner speak about infirmities, reproaches, necessities, persecutions, distresses than all that God had done through his labours. Indeed, in the next verse he reveals that he only wrote about himself because they had compelled him. Instead, the apostle wrote a considerable amount about other people. In Romans chapter 16, he lists around 33 people who had contributed to the work of the Lord. In 1 Corinthians 16, he mentions 7. In 2 Timothy 4, around a dozen. Here in Colossians chapter 4, there are 10 people named. Paul appreciated the help, the support, and fellowship of other Christians, and he valued them. Appreciating others is an important characteristic of Christian life. And to say so sometimes does not go amiss. Just to underline the value that Paul placed on others, there are 3 men in these verses who are described in quite a lovely way. There is in verse 7, Tychicus, a fellow servant. And then in verse 10, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner. And then in verse 11, 3 men who are called my fellow workers. There's a man called Archippus at verse 17 who is described in Philemon verse 2 as our fellow soldier. Each of them is called a fellow. There's something very equitable about that word. In fact, when we use the word fellowship, we're really referring to a partnership in which people share equally. And in a sense, it's surprising that Paul wrote this way. We tend to think of the great apostle and imagine that, well, his travelling companions were the 2nd division. But Paul did not think that way at all. Earlier in chapter 2, we thought about the with words that Paul attaches to the start of so many other words in his writings, the Greek word soon. That's the word that is translated fellow on each of these occasions. These were men who were with Paul in his ministry, his trials, and his labours. In the Old Testament, we read about a man called Jonadab, who was asked the question, is thine heart right as my heart is with thy heart? 2 Kings chapter 10. The question was really, is your heart with mine? The hearts of these men were with Paul in God's work. Are we really with one another in the things of God? Maybe this period of separation will impress upon us how much we need one another and help us to appreciate our fellowship and togetherness all the more. In our penultimate video, we will think of a man who laboured fervently.